Alert! New zombie virus is taking over the world. A new and terrifying virus is spreading rapidly across the globe, and it's unlike anything the world has ever seen. The virus, which scientists are calling Necro-X, has infected millions of people in a matter of weeks, causing widespread panic, chaos, and devastation. As health authorities and governments scramble to understand the virus, its symptoms, and its effects on the human body, the global population is left in fear of what comes next. The virus, known for transforming ordinary humans into aggressive, mindless beings with an insatiable thirst for human flesh, has brought humanity to the brink of collapse. People are calling it the zombie virus, but the truth behind its origins and the science of how it works remains a mystery. It all started in a small, unassuming town in rural South America. Reports emerged of strange, violent outbreaks that were initially dismissed as isolated incidents. Authorities first assumed they were dealing with a mutated form of rabies or a highly aggressive bacterial infection. However, as the violence spread, it became clear that this was something far more sinister. People were not just falling ill or becoming violent, they were losing all semblance of humanity, with their bodies undergoing disturbing transformations. The first victim of Necro-X was a young man in his 20s who suddenly began exhibiting signs of extreme aggression, tearing through his neighbors' homes and attacking anyone in his path. What was most chilling was his complete disregard for his own well-being. Despite his injuries, he continued to attack and chase after anyone he could, never stopping to rest. Witnesses described his movements as unnatural, almost jerky, as if his body was no longer in control. Within hours, the town was in chaos. Authorities quickly declared the town a quarantine zone, but it was already too late. By the time the military arrived, the virus had spread beyond control. Within days, the outbreak expanded to neighboring cities, and soon after, it had infiltrated major urban centers around the world. As governments tried to contain the spread of the virus, they found themselves overwhelmed. Hospitals were flooded with patients exhibiting the same symptoms: fever, disorientation, violent behavior, and eventually, death followed by reanimation. The virus didn't just kill, it transformed the infected into something else entirely. Once the host succumbed to the virus, their body reanimated with little to no cognitive function, becoming a mindless, ravenous creature that attacked any living being in sight. These newly resurrected creatures, often referred to as zombies, were incredibly dangerous, able to track their prey through sound, smell, and sight. The spread of Necro-X was quick and brutal. The virus seemed to be highly contagious, transmitted through saliva, blood, and even the air in some cases. Those who were bitten or scratched by an infected person quickly began showing signs of the virus themselves. With no cure in sight, and no real understanding of how to combat it, the world plunged into a state of emergency. Major cities were locked down, and entire regions declared martial law. Governments urged citizens to stay inside their homes, but the rapid spread of the virus made it clear that survival would require more than just staying put. The world's best scientists and medical experts worked day and night to find a solution, but each effort to contain or eradicate the virus proved futile. Hospitals and research facilities became targets for the zombies, who roamed the streets in large, terrifying hordes. The infected were no longer just mindless bodies, they were stronger, faster, and more dangerous than any wild animal. As the number of zombies grew, entire cities were overrun. People could no longer trust the safety of their homes, as the virus spread faster than authorities could manage. The global economy collapsed under the pressure, as trade and transportation were halted. Social systems broke down, and society as a whole began to unravel. Communities that were once thriving were now abandoned or destroyed. Panic ensued as people fled to any and every safe haven they could find, but safety was increasingly difficult to come by. At first, some theorized that the virus might be a result of biological warfare, created in a secret lab by rogue nations or corporations. Others speculated that it was a natural mutation, perhaps a long-dormant virus that had suddenly awakened due to environmental factors, like climate change or overpopulation. No one could say for certain. What they did know, however, was that the virus was highly infectious, and there was no way to predict who would be affected next. Some survivors tried to band together, forming small groups to fight for survival, but trust became a rare commodity. Those who were left untouched by the virus found themselves turning against each other, fighting over limited resources, shelter, and weapons. Meanwhile, military forces around the world attempted to fight back against the zombie hordes, but their efforts were largely in vain. Conventional weapons were ineffective against the zombies, as their bodies seemed to resist normal damage. Bullets would pierce their flesh, but they would continue to move, relentless in their quest for human flesh. Only severe damage to the brain, like a shot to the head, seemed to stop them. Unfortunately, finding and training enough people to effectively fight the infected became an overwhelming task. The military was stretched thin, and the world's remaining resources were rapidly dwindling. As society continued to collapse, an eerie calm began to settle in among the survivors. Small pockets of humanity clung to hope, but it became clear that survival was no longer about returning to the world they knew. The old ways of life were gone, and the fight was now about adapting to a new, dangerous world. Survivors began to realize that it was not just the zombies they had to fear. The virus was turning humans into monsters, and it was also turning survivors into something else entirely: distrustful, paranoid, and willing to do anything to stay alive. In the midst of the chaos, a small number of researchers and scientists managed to stay hidden, continuing their work in the hope of finding a cure or vaccine. They were still investigating the origins of Necro-X, trying to understand how the virus affected the brain and the body. Their most promising lead was a genetic mutation that seemed to occur in those who survived the initial infection. Some survivors, who had been bitten or scratched but did not succumb to the virus, showed strange, unexplained mutations. These people, called resistance, had developed heightened senses, faster reflexes, and in some cases, even the ability to communicate with the infected, or at least observe their behavior patterns. The scientists believed that the virus could be defeated if they could isolate this mutation and use it to create a cure or immunity. However, getting to the point where they could conduct human trials was a dangerous endeavor in the current climate. As the global situation grew dire, the world began to feel the full weight of its vulnerability. What was once considered science fiction had become an all-too-real nightmare. The world watched helplessly as cities fell, and millions of people succumbed to the virus, transforming into mindless monsters. In the aftermath of this apocalypse, humanity was left to ask one simple question: could the world survive a new era dominated by the undead? The only thing certain in this terrifying new world was that survival depended on adaptability, innovation, and a relentless will to fight. As humanity confronted this unprecedented crisis, it remained to be seen if civilization could rise again from the ashes of this deadly virus. But for now, the battle against Necro-X was only beginning, and the world would never be the same again.